clothes.
It's a beautiful day on the South Strand. Welcome to Conversations with the Hoff. I'm Steve Hoffman, your host, and with me in the studio today is my glorious leader and executive producer of Liberty Crack Media.
Hello, everyone.
Trip Detmering. Today's episode, we're going to deviate from the usual political banter that you're used to on Conversations with the Hoff.
Yay!
You can't listen to TV or radio these days without hearing some new revelation about extraterrestrials or UFOs. For example, White House app developer linked to UFO conspiracy content. Disappearance of Air Force general sparks UFO speculation. Trump orders release of UFO files. Congressman warns of a dark trend of missing UFO scientists. And Bill Maher, of all people, becomes a UFO believer. So I researched the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON, to find an expert on this subject matter for today's show. One name continuously popped up, and that was Kathleen Marden. She's a UFO researcher, author, scholar, and lecturer who earned her BA degree from the University of New Hampshire and participated in graduate studies in education at the University of Cincinnati and UNH. She served for 10 years as MUFON's Director of Field Investigative Training and another 10 years as Director of MUFON's Experiencer Research Team, that's ERT. She is also the recipient of the International UFO Congress Lifetime Achievement Award. Presently, she is a MUFON Lifetime Member, benefactor, and research consultant for the ERT. She also sat on the advisory board of the Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Encounters. She has worked on 4 research studies on UFO abductees experiencers with nearly 5,000 participants. She's the primary author or co-author of several books. Her bestseller with ufologist and lecturer Stanton Friedman is Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. They co-authored 2 other books, Science Was Wrong and Fact Fiction and Flying Saucers. Her book with Dennis Stoner, it might be Denise Stoner, The Alien Abduction Files, includes her investigation into 6 intergenerational cases of ET contact. Her 5th book, Extraterrestrial Contact, What to Do When You've Been Abducted, is a comprehensive guide on UFO abduction phenomena and a self-help book for UFO abductees. Her latest book is Forbidden Knowledge, a personal journey from alien abduction to spiritual transformation. She has appeared as an on-camera expert on 65 television and video productions and innumerable radio shows and podcasts. Additionally, she has lectured at conferences across the United States and in several foreign countries. Welcome to the show, Kathleen.
Thank you. It's great to be with you this morning.
Yeah, I have many topics that I'd like to talk about, but I understand that you want to talk about your latest book, Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. So
yes, that's not my latest book, but it is one of my most important books because it reflects many, many years of investigation.
How many years did you research that book?
Well, first of all, I was 13 when it happened, and I was an eyewitness to the impact that it had on my aunt and uncle, Betty and Barney Hill. But later in life, in the mid-1980s, I moved from Colorado to New Hampshire, where I was brought up and where Betty Hill lived. And so I began a really in-depth investigation of the case at that time. I knew that there were very dismissive statements that had been issued over the years about it, but I wanted to know for myself if this really did happen. So I spent the next many years investigating this case, doing research, going to archival collections, driving along the entire route in the time frame that Betty and Barney drove, looking for any possible problems regarding the case, anything that might lead to a prosaic explanation. So it's all in my book.
Yeah, that was long time ago. We actually have a contact. There's a thing called 6 degrees of separation, where everybody on the planet is really connected to other people through 3 or 4 different contacts. And when I was stationed in Pease Air Force Base, New Hampshire, I had a girlfriend who was a friend of Betty Hill. And we later got married in Betty Hill's backyard. And then now when I did this research, your name pops up, and you turn out to be the niece of Betty Hill, who even wrote a book about her. And then later on, when Betty Hill was dying of cancer, my ex-wife went to go visit her, and you actually met her.
Yes, I did meet her. And Betty, over the years, Betty spoke of her many times.
So that's definitely one of those strange coincidences. You know, you know, 60, only a couple of degrees of separation there. So tell us more about the abduction. What actually happened during this abduction? You know, when did it happen? Where did it happen?
Yeah, if you can kind of, some of our listeners may not even be familiar with the story of Betty and Barney Hill. If you can kind of go through the story and what happened, and get people kind of caught up, our listeners caught up on what was going on.
Yes, I'd love to. Well, let me begin with who Betty and Barney Hill were. Betty was my aunt, my mother's sister. She grew up in Kingston, New Hampshire, and she was a very bright girl. She went to the University of New Hampshire and earned her bachelor's degree and became a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. She was very politically actively involved. Even when she was a student, she was the head of the student group for interracial relations. So it shows how far back she was an advocate for civil rights and equal rights and human rights. Now, so she lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. She'd been married once. She was divorced. And then she met Barney Hill, who came to New Hampshire on vacation. And he worked for the post office. He had served honorably in the Army during World War II, and they had never intended to marry, just to be friends, because he was black and she was white, and they were well aware of the impact that had back in the 1960s. So they ended up falling in love. They were married in 1960. Barney moved to New Hampshire. He was very actively involved in the NAACP, locally and regionally. He, in fact, in 1965 was appointed to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission as a representative for the state of New Hampshire. They were very active in setting up programs for the people of the state of New Hampshire. Barney set up a literacy program so that back in those days you had to pass a literacy test to vote. So he received an award for the work he did on that. Also from Sergeant Shriver for the poverty program for the federal government, to using funding to set up the Rockingham County Community Action Program. So you can see they were well known in the community. They were respected people. And they decided to take a vacation.
They were very upscale, respected citizens of their community. That's good. They weren't crackpots.
They were not. They were stable people. They had no previous interest in UFOs. They never read a book on it or anything like that. So they went on a vacation trip. It was a surprise for Betty during her vacation in September 1961. They went to Niagara Falls. and they spent the night there. They spent the second night as tourists in the Thousand Lakes area. And then the third day, they went to Montreal and decided not to spend the night there, but to travel on home. They were well rested from the night before. They thought if they grew tired, they would just stop. So they're driving home. They stopped in upstate New Hampshire for a little snack and some coffee, because in those days, things were not open like they are today, 24 hours or whatever. So they're heading south through New Hampshire toward their home in Portsmouth when they're in a mountainous area, the White Mountains, and this unusual object swoops down. And Betty watches it for a period of time, and finally they end up stopping to look at this. Once north of what is called Franconia Notch, which is a beautiful tourist area. There are mountains on each side. The U.S. highway went through the center in that time frame. It's an interstate highway now. Streams, a nice tourist area. So they enter Franconia Notch, and the craft is still following them. It's coming in closer and closer. They finally stop at the Old Man of the Mountain, which is 48 feet from forehead to chin. The Old Man is just a stone, natural stone formation that shows the profile of an old man. In fact, it fell off the mountain in 2003. But they said that the craft was at least 1.5 times the length of the old man's profile and appeared to be lighted on only one side and rotating silently in the air. So this really sort of spurred their interest. Barney was a confirmed skeptic. He was going to identify it as being something conventional. Betty was trying to identify what it was, but she had more of an open mind than Barney. They got back into the car. This craft is bouncing back and forth in the sky. Barney compares it to a yo-yo, bouncing out and coming back, bouncing out and coming back. They exit Franconia Notch, and now they're in the tourist area. They pass by an area called Indian Head. It's a motel and cabins, and Betty thinks about stopping, but she's really interested in what she's seeing. So they continue to drive on. And then this craft comes very rapidly and swoops down over the highway. And they have to stop the car in the middle of the highway so they won't be directly under the craft. It's now hovering about 200 feet above them. They look up and they see a row of windows. The craft is no longer rotating. Barney compared the lights behind the windows to the intensity of mercury vapor lamps. Very, very blue-white. He steps out of the car. He had the binoculars. They had been to Niagara Falls, so they took them to look at the scenery. And he looks up at the craft. He wants a better view, so he steps back from his vehicle. And when he does, the craft crosses the highway in front of the vehicle and now descends to within 100 feet of the ground. Barney is standing there looking up at it, still shaking his head, attempting to identify it. He can't. It's silent. It's a hovering disc that he compared to a giant pancake. And behind these windows, he sees figures looking down at him. He can see that they're dressed in black, shiny uniforms of some kind. There's one of them that appears to be wearing some kind of cap on its head, but I wonder if it really was a cap and not some kind of headgear. From my knowledge and all of my years of investigation of thousands of cases. So now little red lights start to slide out from the craft on fin-like structures, and something starts to drop down from the bottom of the craft. He's staring up at one in the window that he calls the leader. The others had gone to what appeared to be a panel on the opposite wall of this kind of corridor that encircled the outside of this craft.
Okay.
And Barney becomes so terrified that he tears the binoculars from his eyes, breaking the leather strap in the process, and runs screaming back to the car, telling Betty that they have to get out of there or they're going to be captured. So as he's entering the car, he looks up and the craft is moving in his direction. They're speeding down the highway. He tells Betty to roll down the window and look up to see if the craft is above the vehicle. She does. All she can see is blackness, even though it's a bright light night. She was looking for the lights on the craft, but she didn't see any lights. Later, they determined that the craft was over their vehicle and must have been fairly low. Seconds later, they heard a series of code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of their car. Barney compared those sounds to the sound of a tuning fork having been dropped. There were about 6 to 8 of those, rhythmic. And when that happened, the car vibrated. And Betty and Barney felt a tingling sensation. In fact, she felt of the metal on the car, wondering if she'd receive an electric shock, but she did not.
Okay.
Very rapidly, they began to lose track of what they were doing, of their memories. And the next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the highway with very little recollection of what occurred in the room.
Right. They had forgotten everything that had happened until something happened in the future, right?
Well, no, they hadn't forgotten everything. Everything I told you is documented in the reports that they made to Pease Air Force Base the day after they arrived home, and to the National Investigations Committee for Aerial Phenomena based in Washington, D.C. in late September, and then an interview in October of 1961. So we have the documented evidence. What they did not remember was what happened in that period where their memories were very, very reduced. They did remember finding themselves on a dirt road lined with tall trees. They did remember a roadblock. They didn't know where or when that occurred. They remembered a fiery orb. And they went, beginning in the late fall of 1961, to New Hampshire, and then again in the spring, and for a few years looking for that spot. And they couldn't find it. So I'm going to take a breath now and see if you have questions for me.
Yeah, I read the book Interrupted Journey when I was stationed there, and I'd listened to a lecture by Betty at the base library. And I came away with a little different impression of their experience. You described everything that they experienced, but I thought, according to that book, it all didn't come out until after Barney underwent psychiatric evaluation in Boston. But you're telling me that they actually did file a complete report on a lot of what they saw when they got home.
You can go to my website at Kathleen-Marden and read those original reports. I am the trustee of the estate, And all of the reports are also in an archival collection at the University of New Hampshire. Yes, so all of this information is well documented.
Now that's Kathleen-Marden.com?
Yes,
Okay.
Katleen dash or hyphen MARDEN.com.
Okay, we'll have that down in our show notes.
In those reports, did they describe the appearance of the aliens?
Episode 1 of Microphone Monkeys drops this Thursday, January 15th. If you are into sadism, or just pain in general, tune in on your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcast and more.
They did not mention the aliens or whatever figures they were, to Pease Air Force Base because they feared they would be ridiculed. But they did mention it to NICAP. So
Right.
in that September 26th letter that Betty wrote to NICAP, she described the figures dressed in shiny black uniforms and how Barney had become so frightened that he had developed a mental block for their faces, for the rest of their appearance, that it was terribly frightening. She requested information regarding a possible psychiatrist who used hypnosis because they felt that Barney would benefit from that. I know you're not reading. It's inconsistent with the information in the interrupted journey, but the interrupted journey is not accurate.
Okay.
It was written to entertain the public.
Yeah, definitely an entertaining book. Also, when I used to go to the library and listen to Betty, it wasn't just myself at the library. That library was packed. And people in there were also officers who flew those planes, those FB-111s. And occasionally, Betty would tell me, an officer would come up to her and say, I've got an experience I'd like to share with you when we came in for a landing over the ocean. And those officers were very, very afraid of saying anything to their bosses, to the other Air Force generals and stuff, because they would be, I don't know, ridiculed or their careers could be in jeopardy. So
yes, and that remained in place for many, many years. It was true of airline pilots as well. And this taboo extended to academia. There was, you do not broach that subject. If you do, you'll be in big trouble. You could lose your career. If you were a pilot, you could be you could be grounded for a year. You could have to undergo psychiatric evaluation. There was really a huge taboo against it, and it's beginning to lift.
yeah, if you speak the truth, we'll just have to send you off to the gulag.
Well, Kathleen, I wanted to also ask you, have you been involved with this for so long, and you've been involved with MUFON for so long? Have you seen a change in not only the culture and perception of what MUFON and yourself is doing? I see that even the lexicon has changed. Now we don't really say UFO anymore. It's now UAP, and they have other reports that have been coming out, other data. We're having files that are being released by the government, and now investigations into people that have been involved in this, as far as being missing or having issues. Have you seen a cultural change in the country, in the perceptions of the studies and the acceptance of extraterrestrials?
Yes, there has been, and this began on December 16, 2017, when the New York Times published an article on the front page and on another full page regarding black budgets and UAPs and flying discs, whatever. And an intelligence officer, military officer, Luis Elizondo, had worked at the Pentagon. on a secret UFO program, research program. And he grew frustrated with the secrecy around it. And he ended up quitting his job in protest. And he spoke, could only reveal information that was not classified. But he spoke to journalists, Ralph Blumenthal, Leslie Kane, Helene Cooper, who, and they wrote this very interesting article, and it spread like wildfire. They talked about military radar reports and visual sightings of the same craft, and how they could outfly and outmaneuver anything that we had. How they could hover at 40,000 feet and in just a second or so drop to feet above the ocean and bounce back and forth over the ocean. They said like a ping pong ball, and how this craft seemed to know what the military was doing before the military did.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
so there was some level they couldn't figure this out, but there's been a tremendous amount of investigation since then. And then Marco Rubio introduced a bill to Congress to have a committee, a congressional committee, study this and request documents from the Pentagon. So those hearings went on for at least 2 years, probably more than that. It was the Congressional Oversight Committee on UAPs. And you can go to YouTube and look for that. If you haven't looked into this, you can also Google the Tic Tac UFO. And there were, many UFO sightings that have gone public. The Department of Navy has even stated that some of these craft did not belong to them. So there's been a lot of speculation about, are they our advanced craft? Do they belong to one of our enemies? And the conclusion by those experts who have looked into this, the military officers and the scientists, say that no, they don't belong to us or to anyone on this planet. They came to the same conclusion in 1947 when they began their investigation called Project Sign. And they investigated quite a number of very good cases by Air Force enlisted people.
That's all interesting, and I'm going to get into more of that in future episodes of Conversations with the Hoff. But I'd like to learn a little bit more about what happened when Betty and Barney Hill were actually captured and are now inside the UFO. What happened to them during that period of time?
Yes, well, this was very interesting and is very controversial because we know that something happened. There was at least 2 hours missing time that could not be accounted for. They arrived home 2 to 3 hours later than they had anticipated. So Barney was so distressed over what occurred, the sighting that he had of these non-humans. And to Walter Webb, he even said they were somehow not human. Walter Webb was an astronomer and NICAP investigator. And so all of this played so heavily on him that he ended up with bleeding ulcers. He started drinking, he couldn't sleep, he couldn't cope with what was going on. And he was finally referred to Dr. Benjamin Simon, who had very successfully, during World War II, treated soldiers returning from the war who were terribly psychologically damaged. They had what was called conversion hysteria, shell shock. They had physiological symptoms such as being unable to walk, unable to see, but there was a psychological agent that was to play here. And he use deep trance hypnosis to heal these soldiers and send them home to their families. There was a movie, Let There Be Light, made about his work. He was one of the leading psychiatrists in the United States. And he had set up the psychiatric unit at the Mason General Hospital in Long Island. He taught at Harvard and Yale, owned his own hospital at one time. When Betty and Barney saw him, he had retired but was working just part-time. And they saw him every Saturday for a period of 6 months. And he hypnotized them separately. They went because of Barney's problem, the physiological problem that would not recede with traditional medical treatment. He hypnotized them separately. He reinstated amnesia, so they couldn't remember what they experienced at the end of the hypnosis session. They couldn't share information. Each said that they found themselves on this dirt road lined with tall trees. There was this roadblock. They had conscious body recall for that, but now it became very clear. The men standing in the road were the same non-humans that Barney had observed in that hovering craft. And they divided in two groups. They went up to Betty's door, Barney's door. They took them from the vehicle down a path in the woods onto this craft. They took them into separate rooms, and they underwent physical examinations of a type that you would think would be conducted by someone who didn't know a great deal about the human body, yet all the equipment was there to examine the human body. So they took, they're very interested in their skeletal system, in their muscles, in their nervous system. They took skin scrapings. They looked into their eyes, their nose, their mouth, their ears. They took samples from all of the openings in their bodies and that sort of thing. Now, the thing that complicated this is that Betty had 5 dreams. They began 10 days after the experience. And in these 5 dreams, she recalled parts of what she stated under hypnosis. So the question is, was she only repeating her dreams under hypnosis? Is this not what really happened, but only what she dreamed had happened? And had this information been passed to Barney? Well, I did a comparative analysis of their statements, and you'll read it in my book, Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience, with my colleague, nuclear physicist and UFO investigator Stanton T. Friedman. And I found significant discrepancies between Betty's dreams and what Betty and Barney stated under hypnosis. They agreed, but in some cases, there was significant discrepancies. So Betty's dreams were different than the hypnosis. For example, in Betty's dreams, she observed 5.5 foot tall men in the road at that roadblock. They were dressed in military cadet uniforms, blue, with caps on their heads. They had black hair, human features, large noses, ears, all of that. Under hypnosis, they remembered very different entities with large chests, large heads, slanted eyes. Barney remembered those slanted eyes before hypnosis as well. The memories finally came to him. So very spindly arms and legs, walking different humans. So there was a major difference there. So it's
which is kind of the usual picture you get of a space alien these days, with the big head and the spindly body.
Yes, yeah, you too. There are several different species of space aliens that you hear about today that people claim that they have observed. But yes, that's what Betty and Barney saw is roughly similar to kind of what Bud Hopkins and all of his experiencers kind of later promoted as the Greys.
Because of the time limitations, can you tell us a little bit about the medical experiments that they actually performed on Betty and Barney? Some of those experiments were types of things that they weren't practicing normally back in those days, I believe.
Yes, well, particularly on Betty, they removed her dress, breaking the zipper in the process and tearing the stitching. As she tried to escape, she'd also torn down the hem and torn the lining, stitching of the lining on her dress. But so they removed that dress. It dropped to the floor. By the way, it has been examined in scientific laboratories several times with very interesting anomalous findings. But anyway, they placed her on this table, and the one that she called the examiner had a long needle. It connected to a tube, and she said, "What are you going to do with that?" And he said, "I only need to place it in your navel." This was telepathic conversation, apparently, but she understood him, and she said, "Don't do it; it will hurt." And he said, "It won't hurt," and he inserted it into her navel. And it hurt terribly. She went into hysterics. In fact, Dr. Simon had to end the session early because of the level of pain she experienced. Now, that reminds us of amniocentesis,
right,
which was not being used in any medical facility, not in any hospital at the time that Betty had this experience.
So back in 1961, that wasn't a usual procedure.
It was not. So, you have to question where this memory came from. There was also, after her exam, when they went in to examine Barney, she was left alone with the reader, and she saw what she called a book. It had a large, very thin, hard cover, and she opened it, and there, embedded in what was sort of a page underneath, she saw vertical rows of symbols. I asked her during my investigation of her case to sketch those symbols for me, and she sketched the ones that she could recall. Now, Dr. Don C. Donderi, who was, he's now a retired professor at McGill University in the Department of Psychology, and Dr. Stuart Appel from the State University of New York at Brockport did two experimental studies on people who believed that they had been abducted by and taken aboard craft and had observed these symbols. They sketched them under hypnosis. And then there were students that were hypnotized and told to imagine alien symbols and sketch them. And then just common members of the college students. And they did a comparative analysis using statistical data instrument, and they discovered that those symbols sketched by the abductees were very much alike, but very different than the other two groups. Now, Dr. Donderi saw Betty's symbols that I published in Captured for the first time in 2007. Now, the doctors had completed their studies prior to that. Dr. Donderi compared Betty's symbols to the other symbols, and he said many of them were nearly identical to the other experiencers. So the scientists determined that UFO abduction could possibly be real. Also, Betty asked the leader, the one she called the leader, where he was from. And out of the wall, he pulled what was sort of like a three-dimensional star map that just sort of hung in the air. That's very different from her dreams, where in the dreams he pulled down like a classroom plastic or paper map on a roller. This was high tech. And it was like looking out a window at 16 stars, 12 connected by lines, and some solid lines, some dotted lines. The stars were different colors and different sizes, some as large as a nickel, others just pinpoints. And he said to her, "Do you know where you are on this map?" And she said, no, she didn't. And he said, "Well, if you don't know where you are, there wouldn't be any point in showing you where I'm from." Now, in the interim, he had stated to her that that they had come from one of those systems, and that the solid lines were trade routes, and that the dotted lines were expeditions.
Were they ever able to pinpoint exactly what galaxy or star system they were from?
Yes, this has been verified by several scientists who were astrophysicists. A brilliant woman from Ohio ended up doing the original research back in the late 1960s, early 1970s. She couldn't find a match, although she had constructed 14 models of our local galactic neighborhood out 54 light years. And finally, we made technological progress. We had better distance data. She rearranged the stars to reflect the better distance data, the distances. And keep in mind that this was not just a guess. This was doing all of the mathematical formulations to place those stars in their proper 3D location and that segment of our galaxy.
Okay, so you've built our enthusiasm up, or our suspense up here. And what was the outcome? Where do they think that these aliens were actually from?
Well, what she identified were binary stars from Zeta Reticuli.
Zeta Reticuli.
It's visible only from the southern hemisphere.
Okay.
Now, scientists in that time frame said that's impossible because binary stars cannot have planets orbiting around these stars in a stable orbit. They're too close together. Now, later, they discovered that they were wrong. It is possible that stars could be orbiting in a stable orbit. So that leaves a question. And I think
that leaves many questions. Matter of fact, we're running out of time. And because there's so many questions, you better know that there's definitely going to be more conversations with the Hoff that's going to deal with this subject matter.
Yeah, Kathleen, I hope we get a chance to chat with you some more, because this is extremely interesting. I am filled with 1,000 questions I want to ask you, so I hope you can come back sometime.
Yes, I'd love to come back.
This topic is definitely begging for more conversations with the Hoff, and we're going to have more experts on the show in the future. And please keep your phone open, because you'll probably be getting a call from us. So this episode, thank you very much for being on the show. This episode has been brought to you by Liberty Crack Media. To learn more about the many podcasts brought to you by this network, please go to libertycrackmedia.com, and while you're there, click on the donate button so we can help to deliver our message to an even broader audience. And now a word from our glorious leader, the executive producer of Liberty Crack Media, Trip Detmering.
Well, thank you, Hoff. I just want to let, and thank you, Kathleen. If people want to see more about Kathleen Marden and her information, go to kathleen.marden.com. You'll see that in our show notes. You'll also see links to her books like Captured and alien abduction files, etc. We'll have all the books in there too, and we hope that you tune in for even more exciting and really interesting information that we have for you on Conversations with the Hoff. Thank you, everyone.
Pull up a chair, leaning close. Got a question in a black coffee glow. From campus quads to the Capitol steps, we're talking who we are, what come next. Conversations with the Hoff, where the big ideas kick the shoes off. Liberty, tradition, side by side. Argue, laugh, then let it ride. Conversations with a Hoff. Turn it up and turn it over in your mind. Tax to the hill or left alone. How much power do we loan? Rights on paper, rights in hand. Where do we draw that line in the sand? Conversations with a Hoff, where the big ideas kick their shoes off. Liberty, tradition, side by side. Argue, laugh, and let it ride. Conversations with a Hoff. Turn it up and turn it over in your mind. Is it either or in between? Old school roots and a freedom dream. Pull that thread, see what you find. One more question, we're out of time. Conversations with the Hoff, where the big ideas kick the shoes off. Liberty, tradition, side by side. Argue, laugh, then let it ride. Conversations with the Hoff. Hit subscribe and take a little time to think it through.